Welcome, everybody. Welcome. I'm so happy you joined us today for this last Fire Drill Friday until January 8th, when the team is going to be back from the holidays. You know, it turns out the next two Fridays land exactly on Christmas Day and New Year's Day. So we're taking those 2 Fridays off. I know that I'm going to miss our regular gatherings. I really am. And I may end up posting a video to all of you on Instagram on New Year's Day, a kind of a message to go into the new year. So stay tuned. Let's have some good news, shall we? There's so much, actually. It's absolutely historic that Biden has appointed Representative Deb Haaland, the Laguna Pueblo woman. She is a descendant of the original people to populate North America. As Secretary of the Interior, the first time an Indigenous woman has held a cabinet position. She's going to be overseeing roughly 1/5 of the land in the United States, plus more than 109 million acres of wilderness, 422 national parks and wildlife refuges, and 1,000 endangered species. I feel like the earth has moved. This is the most wonderful thing. And then Gina McCarthy, I think that needs another little. Gina McCarthy, former head of the EPA under Obama, is going to be the newly created domestic climate coordinator. This means she'll be coordinating efforts across the entire federal government, making sure that every department's decisions will address the climate crisis and drastically and quickly lower fossil fuel emissions. We hoped that this would happen, and it did. She is a real force. And there's more. I'm not going to do a xylophone. Denmark, the European Union's biggest oil producer, has announced they're putting a final end to the fossil fuel era. That country's government has agreed to end all oil and gas exploration in the North Sea by 2050, as well as cancel its latest licensing round. An important part of the announcement is a commitment to allocate money to ensure a just transition for workers. Speaking of workers, Ørsted, the Danish renewable energy group, together with North America's building trades unions, announced last month a deal to train an offshore wind construction workforce to build the firm's pipeline of projects down the East Coast. And listen, if all the active commercial leases are built, this can mean a proactive plan to transition 83,000 unionized American workers into the offshore industry. This is a huge breakthrough for labor unions, who, as you know, have been wary that a rapid transition to renewable energy would lead to a net loss of middle-class, career-sustaining jobs. This is a big deal. There's no question about it. But in spite of this and the other closures and the big disinvestments that we announced last week, we're far from out of the woods. Here's a stark bit of news that isn't so great from a new production gap report. Between 2020 and 2030, global coal, oil, and gas production will have to decline annually by 11% for coal, 4% for oil, and 3% for gas in order to be consistent with a 1.5 degree Celsius limit that scientists are calling for. They give dire predictions of what will happen if we don't keep warming below that level. And here's the bad news. Government plans and projections right now indicate that an average 2% annual increase for each of those fuels. So we've got a lot to do to make the necessary emission reduction happen and to ensure we have a renewable energy sector in place to provide us with energy without fossil fuels. We need Biden to be able to pass multi-trillion-dollar bills. And there's little chance that can happen unless the Democrats take control of the Senate. And that depends on Georgia. And that's why today we're focusing again on Georgia. I hope you don't feel we're running Georgia into the ground here, but I can't emphasize enough how important what happens in these 2 Senate runoffs, in these 2 races is. It's so important. And I'm proud to say that we've had approximately 500 of you visit the Adopt a State page for Georgia using the special link that we put in our live streams, firedrillfridays.com/Georgia. Please, I know we're in the midst of a holiday, but keep going to that link and volunteering to make the calls to Georgia voters. And oh, by the way, the second half of this show, we're going to watch a few of my favorite moments from the last 11 months. You know, given that it's the end of the year, we're going to see moments from the AOC show and Mary Trump and many others, and I hope you're going to enjoy them. And now, here is Georgia State Senator Jen Jordan to help us understand more about the dynamics in her state right now. In 2017, Jen Jordan won a special election to replace Hunter Hill in the Georgia State Senate, ending the Republican supermajority in the state Senate. She decisively won re-election in 2018 and again this past November. Jen earned a JD from the University of Georgia School of Law and has practiced law for the last 20 years, even though she only looks about 15 years old. She currently is a principal of Shamp Jordan Woodward, an all-woman-owned law firm that specializes in complex trial practice. She serves on the Board of Governors for the State Bar of Georgia and has been consistently recognized as one of the top lawyers in the state. Welcome, Representative Jordan. I'm so grateful you're taking the time to join us. And how are you holding up, given the
We're good.
Yeah,
it's an exciting time here in Georgia. I mean, lots of energy. So we're doing really well, actually.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. With the runoff election approaching, what are your greatest concerns for Georgia as a whole and for your constituents in particular?
You know, I think the thing that worries me the most about the state is really kind of the fractured politics that we find ourselves in. And really nothing has happened to kind of move the state forward because of that. So that's why the runoffs are really so incredibly important. I mean, so many people worked on getting President-elect Biden elected, but I think what we know in terms of the US Senate is that nothing is going to happen in terms of his agenda and the things that we all think are so important, you know, that need to happen unless we can actually get Reverend Warnock and Jon Ossoff elected.
Yeah. Your district that you represent in suburban Atlanta was solidly Republican for a long time, but you won in 2017 and now in 2020, it seems solidly Democratic. What changed and how come?
You know, I think that there were some people moving in and out. So demographically, there were some changes. But I think it's just one of those things where since 2016, people have seen what happens when folks are elected that don't care about the environment, for example, and the EPA has basically been, any work they were doing that was good was basically just shut down under the Trump administration. And a lot of the progress that we made, a lot of that was undone. And so we are seeing it on the ground here in Georgia in terms of there are real implications for electing people who don't believe in government or the function of government. And, you know, I think people got kind of sick and tired of it.
Trump has accused your conservative Republican governor and Secretary of State of being pawns of China because they said Joe Biden won the election fair and square. And in fact, I think he tweeted pictures of them wearing masks with Chinese flags. And he's even encouraging people not to vote, saying, well, it's rigged anyway. What effect is this having, do you think, on the election?
So I think we're not quite sure exactly what the ultimate effect is going to be. I can tell you that there are major concerns within the Republican Party that these actions by the president and by some of the folks around him that are pushing these conspiracy theories, like there's a gentleman here named Lynn Wood, that is actually going to end up suppressing the Republican vote here, which will then end up in a win for Democrats. So they are desperately trying to get Trump kind of back on the bandwagon, so that he'll push out his supporters for Loeffler and Perdue. But that hasn't happened. And if anything, it seems that the president is pushing harder and like you said, retweeting and putting things on social media that are absolutely ridiculous and dangerous in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's hard to understand. But I just heard last night that the last 3 days, the early voting turnout has been bigger than it was in the general election, which is just mind blowing. What does that augur for the results of the election, in your opinion?
So right now, what we know is that at this point in the 2020, in the November election, I think we had 1.21 million people had 1.22 million people had voted. At this point right now, it's 1.21. So we're basically on par with November. And those voters actually are more diverse. They're younger, which obviously, and maybe not so obviously, but inures to the benefit of Democrats in the state of Georgia in terms of our base voters and the people who tend to vote Democratic. So what's great about that is that normally in a runoff, you would expect about a 30 to 40% fall off in terms of turnout. And the fact that we're on par at this point is incredible. And the numbers were announced yesterday that since November 3rd, we've registered 75,000 new voters. So those folks have registered, they're going to vote, and they tend to skew younger, and they tend to be more diverse and non-white. And so all of those are really good signs for Warnock and for Ossoff.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good to hear. My organization there in Georgia, GCAP, has been registering kids that just turned 18. And, I hope that that's paying off. It sounds like it might be. But tell me, 1.2 million Georgians already registered absentee ballots. 85,000 of those applications for mail-in ballots came from voters who didn't vote in November. And you think a majority of those are going to vote for Democratic candidates?
I hope. I think we probably have in there some of the young folks who will now turn 18 before the runoff date. I think we've had people who've moved here legitimately after the deadline before who are registering. And honestly, I think a lot of folks were given hope by Biden's victory here, that a statewide victory is actually within reach. I mean, for so many years, Democrats have said, we can do it, we can do it. And we've been taking baby steps, and we've made incredible strides each election cycle, but we've come up short. I mean, even with Stacey Abrams, we just came up short. And, that has an effect on voters. And so I think Biden taking Georgia and turning it blue at the presidential level, I think that finally people see that it is absolutely possible for Democrats to win statewide. And I think that's why you're seeing actually other people come out that maybe didn't vote in November because they know how important it is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's so good. What should we progressives think of Georgia Republicans like Brian and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger? I mean, they're upholding the law and saying that the election was fair and square, but are they on our side?
So that's what's been fascinating is that, and that's what I've had to grapple with a little bit, because they are doing their job. I mean, they are following the law, and great, right? But when we have to laud people for actually just doing the basics and the bare minimum, we need a reset in this country and in this state. I mean, with respect to Raffensperger and with Kemp, they are not, the idea that they're rhinos is laughable. They are not friends, to progressives, they're not friends to Democrats, and they almost always side with business whenever we have any issues in terms of the environment. So people need to remember that even though they're following the law, and absolutely big thumbs up, pat on the back, at the end of the day, they are not going to support the things and the policies that need to happen and get done to kind of move things forward in this country.
So tell us, what was it like being in the room when Rudy Giuliani presented that batshit legal argument?
It was nuts. I mean, I knew something was up when I walked in and he has on full makeup, because I'm like, what's up with this? And then, OANN is behind me. They're live streaming. And it was just one of these things where it felt like it was being highly produced. And there was just one narrative that was trying to be pushed out to obviously Trump supporters. And they were successful in doing that. But everything they said wasn't true. There was misstatement of fact. There was misstatement of the law. And, for the Republican senators who were kind of complicit with that, it was really irresponsible. And I think that it enabled people to then go on and make death threats, not only against me and another Democratic senator, but also against Raffensperger, against Governor Kemp. And it's kind of really just added gasoline to the fire when it comes to these conspiracies, and given people hope that Trump somehow is going to come in and win the election, when that's absolutely not going to happen.
You've had death threats?
Yeah. It was, there was about a week period of time because there were only 2 Democrats that were really questioning the mayor in that hearing. And it was me and another Democratic Senator, Elena Parent. And people came at us. I mean, we became part of some kind of conspiracy theory. People took a picture and started saying that we were counting votes up in Pennsylvania. It was the craziest thing I've ever been a part of, because none of it was factual. Anybody who actually looked at something said, there's no way that this is right and or true. But look, that is the power that this kind of alternative media has right now. And people are willing to believe just about anything.
I'm so sorry, God. So tell us, what is the most important thing that people outside of Georgia can do to help with the runoffs?
I mean, the first thing is to give money to the organizations on the ground, give money to the candidates. Obviously, money is how they get their message out, how they pay their people. I've heard folks say they want to come down and help. Look, we're in the middle of a pandemic still. The best thing that folks can do is to stay put and let the people that are here do what they're supposed to do, but support them. I mean, there are ways to get involved too, where you can text people, from the comfort of your home in Ohio, wherever you are. Text people, email, but also push out on social media things that are supportive of Reverend Warnock and of Jon. And, because that's kind of how things grow, right? And that's important in terms of supporting them and getting their message out kind of on a much larger level.
Thank you. So I don't know whether our audience realizes how brave you have been talking about your many miscarriages before the House of Representatives. And you fought against the fetal heartbeat bill, which prohibits abortions if a doctor can hear a heartbeat. I mean, it's a draconian bill, and it passed. But your testimony had wide impact, including motivating some women to run for office. Now, let me ask you something. There are real public health issues associated with drilling for oil and fracking for gas. And they include unusual cancers, babies born prematurely, which is the highest risk for infant mortality and for disability, living near a refinery or a place where oil and gas is being extracted if you're pregnant can put you and your child at real risk. So my question is, why don't right-to-lifers who fight so hard against abortion, saying that they're protecting the unborn, why don't they fight against these fossil fuels that do such damage and kill so many unborn and infant children?
Well, I think we know that it's really not about life necessarily. I mean, this was one of the points we tried to make during the debates over HB 481, which was the abortion ban that passed here in the state, is that if you really care about life, you invest in healthcare, you provide you expand Medicaid, you make sure that these mothers and these babies are taken care of and are healthy. And so that expands to environmental issues too. It's not just fracking. I mean, we've got an issue in my district where we have a facility that sterilizes medical products, and they release ethylene oxide into the air. Ethylene oxide has been linked to all kinds of cancers, even childhood cancers, and specifically to upticks in miscarriages and stillbirths. I mean, these kind of environmental concerns and environmental justice issues really are everywhere. And so I think the messaging around that needs to be, if you do care about life, if you do care about healthy families and healthy children, and kind of that kind of value statement, then you have to care about the environmental issues and the environmental policies that, are about everything from fracking to, like I said, ethylene oxide and the release of certain chemicals into the air. And I think it's important. I think if we keep banging the drum on that, they're going to have to listen, because it is that important.
Thanks for that, Jen. And now, Maddie, do we have questions from the audience?
Yes, we absolutely do. So from Silas on Facebook, how long after the election do you think it will take before we know the results?
So I think it'll probably be pretty quickly, fingers crossed. I think part of the issue last time was that we were using new machines, new processes. I think we've obviously had our first pass in November, and I think that the local elections offices kind of have a better handle on things. Also, the absentee ballot have tended to go down a little bit. I think people are wanting to vote on machines in person because they saw some of the controversy around that. So the less paperwork in terms of processing of those absentee ballots, the quicker we can get to a result. So hopefully, fingers crossed, let's say by Thursday, Friday at the latest, I would guess. But not election night, let's be clear. It won't be election night.
So from Antonio on Facebook, how do you think Representative Holland's appointment will impact the fight against oil pipelines?
So I hope it'll be helpful. I mean, I think everybody is inspired by this appointment. I think it's incredible to even think about. So we'll see. I mean, look, Joe Biden has expressed a real commitment, it seems, to dealing with a lot of these issues and to actually do something proactively, understanding what we're dealing with in terms of climate. So let's, fingers crossed that this is really going to make a difference.
From Alyssa on Instagram, do you think Biden will issue pardons for the Trump team? What do you think the political impact of that decision will be if he does?
So that's interesting. I don't think he will necessarily, because I think maybe Trump might already go ahead and do that before Joe Biden is inaugurated. Look, I think that the president-elect has indicated that he's going to let the processes kind of play out. And I think part of the issue is that we really don't know exactly what's happened behind the scenes. I think there's probably more there than any of us know. And I think that he's going to make sure that his administration can get to the bottom of things. And I don't necessarily know if that includes pardons.
From Nina on Twitter, I'm trying to stay hopeful, but these will be tight races. What is the plan if it doesn't go our way?
The plan is you keep fighting, right? Look, in Georgia, it has been a situation where we have made incremental progress. But even if you lose, if you get a little bit further down the road to your goal, you're making progress, and we're eventually going to get there. I mean, you can't give up. That's the thing. Things are too important. Policies are too important. My family, your family, everybody's family is too important. So it's one of those things where if we don't make it over the line, we get ready for the next battle with Kelly Loeffler, which will be 2 years from now. And also you get ready to take over in terms of the governor's mansion, the state house, and the state senate here, because we have that in 22 as well.
Great. And I think a good follow-up to that from Mark on Facebook. What is your greatest hope for 2021?
My greatest hope is that we actually can get some stuff done. I think that, the administration coming in really has a focus and has their eyes on exactly what they need to be focused on. First, the pandemic, and then the economy. But really just trying to get us back to a state of normal and to a point in time where we can talk to each other again and we can actually move to some real solutions. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to, actually things being a little bit more boring and getting out and having normal interactions with people.
That's great. I want to jump in real quick to ask you a question, Representative Jordan. As you know, and I'm just appalled at what's happening, immigrant women and women of color in the Irwin Detention Center in Georgia are being sterilized without their knowledge or approval. I believe an organization I work with there and based in Atlanta called Project South is working on this, and some representatives are going to the United Nations to demand that this be investigated. What do you think can happen to stop this and hold the people accountable who are doing it?
So I know that there are several organizations involved, several law schools are involved in helping to litigate these claims. They're actually had a conversation this very morning about this. I mean, they're gonna try to deal with kind of the human rights constitutional violation issue in terms of all the women. But there are also individual claims for these women who had hysterectomies against their wishes. And people need to be held accountable in any which way we can do it. So I think there are going to be federal claims, there are going to be state claims. It really needs to be investigated. There need to be hearings. And at the end of the day, we've got to get down to the bottom of what happened so that it can never happen again, because it is abominable. And it is crazy to think that this happened in the state of Georgia, that women literally were being put under anesthesia and having their uteruses taken out, and they didn't have a clue that it was even going to happen.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you. Back to you, Maddie.
Great. From Laura on Facebook, do you think there are Biden voters who want a split government, a Democratic president but Republican Congress, who will vote for Perdue and Loeffler? How can we convince them not to?
I think that's what McConnell is putting out there. And look, there is something that appeals to people about kind of a check and balance situation. That used to be something that we would think about in terms of splitting the ticket vote. But what we know in terms of what the majority leader does is that he's just there to obstruct. And for him, it's just about the next election cycle and holding on to power. So it's not about checks and balances. It's about giving President-elect Biden the ability to even move forward on some of the most basic things, like being able to pick members of his cabinet, right? I mean, just really basic things. People voted for change, and that's my message to folks. You voted for change. You don't like where we are and where we're headed. And the only way to kind of put us on a new path is not only having the Biden administration, but giving him the tools and the people that he needs to actually make some progress and turn things around.
That's great. That's a good message for the people on this call that are going to go to and adopt Georgia and make those phone calls. That's a good message to deliver to Georgia voters. That's great. Any more questions, Maddie?
We do. We have one more that I think is a good one, and we're getting from several people, actually. From Devin on Zoom, with the holidays coming up and people seeing and talking to their families, how can I communicate to my family who might not understand the importance of the Georgia runoff and the climate crisis?
You know, it's hard when people, I think that's the hardest thing we've been dealing with, is that it's not even like we disagree on philosophical things anymore. It's that we don't even agree on the same facts. And so that's what's hardest when you're talking to family members who may not even believe some of the basic facts in terms of science. But look, I think even here, I think every state we're looking at kind of these intense kind of climate events or weather events. People know that it's happening, right? If you live here, like in Georgia, I mean, the environment and the climate has changed since I moved to the city of Atlanta. I mean, so it's one of these things where to start talking about it in ways that people understand, and really just to make it clear that this is probably one of the most important things that we're going to be facing. And young people know that, and young voters, absolutely. That's how they're voting. And so I think you just try to have a heart to heart, and hopefully people can see that where you're coming from is from a good place.
Thank you so much. Representative Jordan, thank you for that answer, and thanks for joining me on this Fire Drill Friday and for helping us understand some of the realities of Georgia. Please stay safe and stay strong and enjoy the holidays.
Thank you so much. Thank y'all.
She makes me miss Georgia. The runoff election for the 2 Senate seats in Georgia will happen January 5th, and it's a very tight race. So no matter where you are in the world, you can support the incredible work happening on the ground in Georgia with Vote Save America's Adopt a State program. When you sign up to Adopt Georgia at firedrillfridays.com/Georgia, you'll receive updates specifically about where your remote volunteer efforts or funds are needed to help win these elections and flip those 2 really critical Senate seats. Okay, please do that. Now we're going to watch a few blasts from the past 11 months of virtual Fire Drill Fridays. Me and the team have chosen some of our favorite moments. I hope you'll enjoy them too. And to start us off, we're going with Mark Magana. He's founder of Green Latinos, talking about our documentary moment. You know, when he said this, it really struck me. As you can see by the photos behind me on the wall, Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, Rosa Parks, Harvey Milk, for instance. I'm very much attracted to people who don't just talk about the change that's needed, but are willing to put their bodies and lives on the line. And all my life, I've asked myself, when I see what they stood up for and what was done to them, would I be able to do that? Would I be able to be as brave as that? But we don't ever get tested. So let's listen up.
What I meant by documentary moment is that when we were young, our parents would go to the library and borrow VHS tapes from the local library. And we'd come home, we'd eject the Jane Fonda workout tape from our VHS. And we would be suddenly transported to a different time, watching documentaries about the farm worker movement with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, the anti-war movement with you and Tom, the women's suffrage movement to give women the right to vote with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and the abolitionist movement to end slavery with Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. While we were watching it, I remember I used to wonder if I was alive during those times, would I have been there? Would I have been present? Would I have been on the bridge? Would I have been on the bus? Would I have been in front of the dogs, in front of the hose, at the lunch counter? Would I have been willing to go to jail? Would I have done a hunger strike? The interesting thing right now, and there is a Chinese proverb that speaks to this, which is, may you live in interesting times, is that we are lucky to be alive during a time of great social upheaval and change, and that we no longer wonder what we would do. We no longer have to wonder if we have the mettle to place ourselves in danger, to do this for our children, for our grandchildren. We are the first generation to feel the effects of climate change and the last one to be able to do anything about it. This moment of great upheaval demands large systemic change to defeat the climate crisis. And systemic change will only come with millions of people activated. 11 million to be precise, right, Jane?
Right.
So when your children ask in the future, when they're watching the documentaries of this moment, and your grandchildren, and they say, "What did you do, Abuela? Were you on the bridge? Did you fight?" You don't want to be silent. You want to be able to say, "I fought for you. In fact, you were there too. I had you on my shoulders." And those experiences, Mija and Mijo, those made you the loving warrior that you are today. We need to make this intergenerational, and we need to make it count now. Don't pass up on this documentary moment. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you so much, Mark.
I cannot stress enough how much this is not just about electing Democrats and then thinking that they're going to do the right thing.
Right.
Don't trust our party without holding us accountable. Don't trust any elected official, including myself, without holding us accountable.
And then there's my beloved Lily Tomlin. You know, what I love about this next piece is how Lily really throws herself full-heartedly into things. You know, this is when, maybe you'll remember, this is when we were asking you all to volunteer to call your members of Congress about the HEROES Act. I think that's what it is. I mean, we asked you to call so many times last fall, didn't we? But I asked Lily if she'd role play making a call for Fire Drill Fridays, and she did with her characteristic enthusiasm. Let's watch.
Okay, I got it. It's telling me it's going to connect me with my rep, Brad Sherman.
Okay, well, now you know it's working. That's what it's supposed to do.
Hello. Oh, man, it sent me right to voicemail. They must know I'm friends with you.
Touche, Tomlin. Okay, now go. You got this.
Hi there. This is Lily Tomlin, and I'm a constituent in your district, and I'm talking about I'm calling about the upcoming stimulus package, the Essential Workers Bill of Rights that you'll be voting on, to ask you not to be a jerk. We need you to support this bill to ensure that workers on the front line get proper health care, paid sick leave, and necessary work protections. I can't believe I even have to ask for this. Aren't these basic human rights? Can we just for once be human beings and stop bailing out the fossil fuel industry and the CEOs? Those are not the people who need help. We give it to the people, not the big corporations. These stimulus packages are the biggest infusion of cash into our economy in modern history, and they will define our country for decades to come. Oh, Brad, this is an opportunity to put on your big boy pants and show true leadership and prioritize people over polluters. How am I doing?
Yeah, good. But Lily, great, talk into the phone.
One way to ensure this is to support the Essential Workers Bill of Rights. Essential workers are putting their lives and their families' lives at risk to ensure our health, safety, and security during the coronavirus. As part of the next relief package, Congress must protect the health and well-being of essential workers and their families and give them the compensation and job protections they deserve. Isn't that the least we can do for them? We ask them to risk their lives to care for all of us. Oh, thank you, Brad. Thank you. Let's do this. Oh, what a rush.
Hey, Ben and Jerry, if you were to create a pint of Fire Drill Fridays ice cream, what would be in it?
Well, I think it would have to be a hot cinnamon base, kind of like it would taste like an atomic fireball. And I think maybe it would have those little heart-shaped hot cinnamon candies in it, and some chocolate chunks, because if you want to make any kind of decent ice cream flavor, you have to stick some chocolate chunks in it.
I would have to defer to Ben. Ben early on created all the flavors for Ben and Jerry's, and many people don't know this, but I have never come up with any flavor in the entire 42-year history of Ben and Jerry's.
You should have kept that a secret, Jerry. I can't remember. Did I call or email either one of you to tell you I was moving to DC?
No, you didn't call me. Nope, no calls from me.
You're the last to know everything.
I am.
You told me because I came over to your house for a Greenpeace event. And actually, I don't know if you held to this, but you said, no new clothes. I'm buying no new clothes.
Right. I've held to that. Nothing new.
Yep, me too.
There you go. It inspired me. Although none of us can really go out anyway. But and then you said, I'm moving to DC. And I was just so flabbergasted. But knowing you, there are some people that would say that to me and I would think, oh, it's something they're feeling of the moment. But when you told me, I knew you would move to DC.
Yeah. I think
I didn't though. I had no idea. Nobody told me.
I didn't think you'd come. Oh, I think I did ask Mary to come, but she was working on the series that she's doing now. But her husband, Ted Danson, came and talked about.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important.
Was a big step.
Yeah.
Did you, Mary, did he talk to you about his experience there when he came back?
I was looking through my book to see if I could find one of those beautiful pictures of him, but you guys know how gorgeous he is. You know what? He called me as soon as he was released from jail. And I knew by the sound of his voice that something really important had happened to him. And, my husband, Ted Danson, for those of you who don't know, he spent the majority of his life in environmental activism, focused mostly on the oceans. And he comes from an archaeologist's father, and he was raised with the Hopi Navajo people in Arizona. So the idea of leaving the earth a better place for your having lived on it is a theme that has been a part of our marriage and certainly a part of his life, and is one of the, to me, the sexiest, most beautiful things about him. But he had never been arrested before. And when you talk about these arrests, and you talk about it in the book with such kind of tenderness toward the fact that there are people to whom, they've been arrested for reasons that are so far beyond their control. And then here's someone who chooses to get arrested. And you speak about that with great kind of insight. But I was blown away by how moved he was by the experience and the feeling, even if it's for a little while, of being helpless because your hands are bound and because you can't make a phone call or you better have gone to the bathroom before you get arrested. They were kind and fair, but they didn't coddle anybody. And I think he was very moved by the experience of it, and also just by the collective energy that you all had, the joy in speaking out, the fact that it was so multi-generational, that there were people of all ages and young people not even old enough to vote. And then, our generation. And he was not the same after that experience. In a good way.
I hugged him when he came out to thank him. It's going to make me cry. And I said, thank you. And he took my face in his hands and he said, no, thank you, Jane. This has been important to me. And this was like our third Friday, you know, and we didn't know what was going to happen. So the fact that Ted Danson, who is a big deal, said this to me, that this had changed something in him. I mean, I can't tell you what it meant to me. That was when I knew it was going to work. There's so few opportunities in our life now where we can put our bodies in alignment with our deepest values. And it feels so good. And I could tell that he had experienced that. It was great. That makes me miss those rallies and actions in DC. I hope that we can all get together sometime in the next year and put our bodies on the line. And, you know, having Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez join us was one of my most favorite Fire Drill Fridays. And clearly it was an audience favorite. We had 600,000 people watching that one. I've chosen this excerpt because she so clearly explains why it's important to include justice in our solution to the climate crisis. You know, if we simply switch from fossil fuels to green energy that has the potential to be democratic and decentralized, but we don't create a more equitable, just democratic society in the process, what have we truly accomplished? So listen up.
You know, I've heard a lot of people, environmental leaders too, say, listen, the climate stuff is great, the energy transition is wonderful, but why do we need to talk about racial inequity in this bill? Why does that all have to be in the same bill? Why do we need to talk about the needs of Native communities in the same bill as transitioning our energy sector? And the reason for that is that whether it is explicitly written into legislation or not explicitly written into legislation, every bill around energy, bad or good, has impacts and has an implicit discussion about justice, even if there's nothing justice related written into it. And so when we talk about climate change, when we talk about energy transitions, when we talk about jobs, et cetera, there are communities that are more disparately impacted than others. You know, when we talk about even the transition away from fossil fuels and coal and oil and gas towards, you know, battery development, wind, solar, and other new technologies, those are real communities with real economies. We've seen this in Appalachia, the devastation of what has happened with the coal industry. And so if we don't consciously write in plans and protections for the people who are most likely to be impacted, then we are actively legislating injustice. And so climate legislation with justice at the core develops the plan, it addresses the policy, and it makes sure that no person is left behind. And you also, you know, you spoke to this as well. It's not just that it's the right thing to do, but that it's the politically smart thing to do.
I love her. So it turns out Mary Trump is a supporter and big fan of Greenpeace and was so happy to come on to Fire Drill Fridays. You know, who knew? It also turns out that she is super smart and was a terrific guest. Listen up. It's interesting because it's clear. Well, he says it. People don't love me. You don't love me. They don't love me. There's a need to be loved. So I would think that someone who had a need to be loved would be constantly doing things for people that would make them love him.
That's a great point, and it's actually one of the most tragic things about Donald, because of his very difficult early years. You know, my grandmother got very ill when he was 2.5 years old, and essentially was unavailable to him for about a year. So he was essentially abandoned and left alone and terrified because my grandfather, the sociopath, was incapable of fulfilling the caregiver role and was not even interested in it in any way. So basically, what happened over the years is my grandfather created Donald to be somebody who could fill his own needs, right? And money and power and fame came to stand in for everything else. So when money is the only thing that matters, and it stands in for love and affection and care and respect, you're always going to be craving it, but you're never going to be able to get it, because my grandfather also turned Donald into somebody who's essentially unlovable.
Do you love him?
I don't, which is an awful thing to say. But
your empathy comes across.
Well, you know, as a psychologist, it's really important to understand what happened to people when they were children in the context of the family system. And there are very, very few people who don't come from, people with Donald's kinds of pathologies, who don't come from some really horrible family. My grandfather is an exception. I think my grandfather was born a sociopath, but Donald, I don't believe was. He was turned into this man who was incapable of being loved, of loving, and of empathy. So I have enormous amounts of compassion for the child he was. You know, he and his siblings, including my father, and probably especially my father, suffered horribly. That doesn't mean he shouldn't be held accountable. You know, he absolutely needs to be held accountable. And, you know, as soon as we win in November, that has to be at the very top of the list.
Coming off of what Mary Trump just said, you know, here's something that I've come to believe over my life. The committing of evil acts, of terrible things, that's the language of trauma. That's trauma speaking. And we can and should hate the evil acts, the terrible deeds, hate them. But we have to try not to hate the person committing them, the person who's been traumatized. We have to try to understand why that person committed the acts and not hate them. Because anger, and we should feel anger, anger is righteous. Anger can make us do things about it. But hatred is toxic to us. Carrying that toxic burden of hatred damages us. So I want to encourage us to be angry about the damage that the Trump presidency did to people, to justice, to the truth, to the environment, and to democracy. But let's let go of hatred and work to enhance empathy. Let's try to be loving and patient with those who don't agree with us, and continue to try and persuade them with facts and with lived experience. And here's another thing. It's really important that we take time to rest and reflect and recharge. It's easy to not notice how long we've been holding our breath, shallow breathing, tensing our shoulders until we finally let go and exhale. Let's all remember to breathe deeply and exhale over these holidays. Self-care is a revolutionary practice. And as we're fighting for a better, more sustainable world, let's remember to take care of ourselves. You know, the strength of our movement comes from our ability to sustain our work and be in it for the long haul. So we here at Fire Drill Fridays, as I said, are taking a short break. This is going to be our last show of the year. Over these next 2 weeks, take good care of each other. We made it through this year together. It moves me so much, I cannot tell you. It's what's kept me going this year, and it's going to live in our collective memory forever. I am so grateful to all of you for sharing this time with me and the powerful positive changes that we were able to make in the world. I'm proud of that, and oh, I hope that you're proud of that too. You should be. So we're going to be back January 8th, talking to investigative journalist Antonia Juhas about fossil fuels. how they are in decline and why it's so urgent that we work to hasten the transition away from them. You know, with the election over, we're going to be shifting back into focusing exclusively on nonpartisan work and pressuring Biden to make the right choices to protect the climate and our future. As Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said in one of those clips, we have to hold politicians accountable. We're so happy Biden won. Now we're going to have to hold him accountable. And that's where Fire Drill Fridays comes in, because there's strength in our numbers. So happy holidays to all of you. I'm going to miss you. See you next year.